Everybody says we're a democracy, but that's nowhere written in the Constitution.
We're a democratic republic.
Yeah.
And so we're a democracy. So, I don't know, gentlemen, how you guys have ran your house, but it's always great to have a democracy, but you aren't a democracy at your house, right? Type scenario.
My household is run as a benevolent dictatorship.
But it's not by you, right? My wife's a retired lieutenant colonel. I know who the benevolent dictator is.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Liquid Launch Project. I am Matthew R. Meehan, alongside my partner, the Professor Luigi Rosabianca. What's on tap today, Lou?
Matt, do you remember for Christmas I asked you if you could have a dinner with me and a bunch of people, who would you want to invite? And you said, I want to invite a real sharp finance guy, somebody that worked on Silicon Valley. And I said, I'd love to speak to a con law professor and have like a really nice intellectual dinner about what's going on in the world today. And today I was able to find the entire dinner party in one individual. Today on the podcast, we have Dr. Thomas J. Powell, the founder of the Founder's Office, also happens to be a con law professor at Northeast University, doctorate, and man, he has a resume that would kill the whole podcast. So, Thomas, welcome to the podcast.
Lou and Matthew, it's my pleasure to be here.
So who wants to speak first, the con law professor or the MBA finance fellow?
They're schizophrenic, so they always come through at different times, no matter what it is. So we can be going in one direction.
Well, I'm going to defer
to
my dear esteemed partner. I know he's dying to speak with you. Tell us all about the Founder's Office and how you support capital raising and business.
So the Founder's Office came about in our business out of Silicon Valley. So take back to the 90s, and even before that, I was in banking in the 80s. And as I started my first company, the thing that I saw was that gave me freedom. It brought economic freedom to me. I barely graduated high school because I was working. I was making a lot of money. And that was not of interest to me to go traditional school route. Over time, I did move into a school route, and that led to part of my careers. But it was also still the very entrepreneurial roots. And in the 90s, it was pretty common for the VCs, which was kind of a new area, to take these founders that had these great ideas and then take those ideas and kick the founders out of the business. And the founders didn't have, you didn't have a lot of legal support for those founders at that time. It was mostly backing the VCs. So we started the Founder's Office. Originally wasn't that name, but it has grown. We've done a little more than $3.2 billion in capital that we've raised and deployed for companies, over 240 total exits with over 500 ventures that we've done. They are, a lot of times they're, exactly speaking to your audience, they're the small to medium enterprises. These aren't things, these could be somebody that wanted a restaurant. They got to 2, they grew, they exited. They aren't the Wall Street exits that you're thinking about. It's how they raised their families. It's how did they make their income, but they didn't have the money to start the business. And for that matter, Lou, when I started my very, very first business, I was 12 and I started mowing lawns. I saw a need. I said, hey, I can fill this need. I need income to help the family, but I don't have a lawnmower. So I had to go convince someone with a lawnmower to let me borrow their lawnmower and pay them for that lawnmower. That's raising capital, right? So that's what it was. And then I had to, negotiate with people to actually do the work. So people on the football team, and I could find clients. And then how do you talk a bank into how to do banking? Which, back in the 70s, you could get a bank account as a 14-year-old with for a payroll account without parents signing on it, right? So those are the experiences that make the Founder's Office. Now we're a bunch of lawyers, MBAs, founders, entrepreneurs, and people that have been in the actual experience. Everybody that's on our team has experience in the trenches. So that's how we help people actually implement the foundations that allow them to free themselves. And Lou, you can understand this as the professor side of me. So as a professor, you have to name stuff, right? You have to put your name on it and say, hey, this is an experience or a foundation. So we said that experience of being a founder is the founder's isolation paradox. And it's when everything, no matter how many people you have around you, you are still at the center of making the decisions or the weight of carrying everything. The bank wants you to sign a personal guarantee. Your spouse is saying, when are you coming home? Your mind is still back at the office, no matter what's going on. You still have to sign the payroll checks because you don't trust somebody to actually do that, or you want to see what's going on. You have a lawyer and an accountant, and yet they don't talk to each other. They talk to you to each other, and so they're not communicating. So that's at the center of all these circles, and that's the founder's isolation paradox. And we give the tools and foundations to help founders leave that paradox and actually be able to exit their company, whether that's a formal sale of that company or that is simply the ability to go travel and be free because they've got the right systems and structure to be there.
I love that. You made a really good point. When you said you borrowed a lawnmower that was raising capital, I think most people think raising capital is just in the form of cash, and they don't look at resources that people give them.
It can be, I borrow, I need to use a building. I mean, how many nonprofits get started because they borrowed a building? And I've been in nonprofits for almost all of my adult life as well. We raise a lot of capital for the nonprofits. A lot of times it is just that. We need resources. Capital's a resource, but there's lots of other resources.
Yeah, I love that. So basically what you do is you come in, let me just dumb it down because I don't have all the degrees you are. I barely graduated high school too. So, but I didn't go back to school like you. So anyway, with that being said, you go into an organization. Somebody's wearing all the hats. They're getting pulled in 27 different directions. They don't know which way is up. They don't want to let anybody down. You actually get them out of the weeds to work on the business, help them build out a sound org chart, and have direct reports to make their life easier so they can go on vacation when they want.
Yes, they can also. We have a whole world of founders that are now in their 50s and 60s that have lived that experience for their whole life. I mean, their name's on the door. It doesn't matter if they're a dentist or it doesn't matter if they're the local barbecue joint. They're sharing this in their 50s and 60s as an experience. And they're like, and my kids don't want to take over the business. What do I do? And so every founder does have an exit. It's 100%. It's just whether the exit is on their terms, right? Is it a planned exit, right? It could be a medical emergency and all of a sudden the business goes bankrupt because there's no one to take it over. There's no systems or structure there for that to be able to actually happen, or the spouse has to step in, which they did not want to do that. All of these things are things that if you look backwards, we love to say the old adage of the best time to plant a tree is 30 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is now. And so it takes about 3 to 3.5 years for most small to medium-sized businesses to actually get the implementation in place. It's not just read one book. I love Dan Sullivan with the Strategic Coach, and it's freeing you out the business, but he's really clear. It takes about 3 years. And I've been a student of Dan's for 26 years. I'm his ideal client. I'm a slow learner with deep pockets, right? So I continue to be implementing these things as we go along. So I'm still working on everything that we talk about.
So let's switch over to the Constitution because I got some questions. So there's a story out there that they drank a lot. There's a famous bar tab when this 4,400 word document that we used to rule our country with was written, right? Allegedly, there was 54 bottles of Madeira, 60 bottles of claret, and 8 bottles of whiskey drank.
Before you start besmirching the reputation of our founding fathers, it was a hot summer in Philadelphia. And the water wasn't exactly pure, if you know what I'm saying. So a little Madeira and rum now and again just kept the soul clean.
I mean, with all fairness, though, everything was done in taverns back then. They were for political movements. They were for hanging out. It was the center of town life.
It was, absolutely. And if you go back to that, so, we're right now at this time where so much of our country is talking about our 250th anniversary. That has nothing to do with the Constitution. That has to do with the Declaration of Independence, an entirely different organization of men. Some of those went on to do the Constitution. Okay, that was a decade and a half later when they did the Constitution, which was because we became a ragtag states, which was actually a confederacy. Most people don't think that. They hear Confederacy and they think
can I ask you a
Civil
question?
War.
Weren't they supposed to just update the Articles of Confederacy, and they scrapped it, and came up with a whole new system?
That's really damn close. There's a great book called The Summer of 1787, and that's exactly, I mean, really, and it starts with Madison and George Washington kind of sitting in the room next door to each other, and you've got the Potomac right down below George Washington's house, and they're seeing that they can't even cross the Potomac because you've got different ownership of different states, and they're like, nope, I'm taxing you over here. I'm taxing you. And what they realize is we're heading right back to Europe. We're going to have all these different fiefdoms that print their own currencies, that we can't raise a military. We've got France on one side, we've got Spain on another side, and we've got England. All of them want their colonies back. And if we don't come together and actually set up a governing body that allows for us to do these various things that we need to do as a federal body, and then you've got Jefferson going, but no, I want Virginia. We're the biggest, baddest state, and so we're going to retain our power. And so that's where the juxtaposition of the states and the federal government came together. And so not to get too much into the weeds, but you've got Madison, who was a brilliant person and a well-read person, and Jefferson, who had all these resources. Jefferson gives him his library that had been saved during the 1400s, during when the marauders are coming in doing stuff. He was able to buy these up, and Madison is just reading it like, why did Rome fail? Why did Greece fail? Why did these other empires fail in the past? And so he came up with this, and he's the one that came up with it. So the document wasn't came up with in the bar. The Bill of Rights came up in the bar. And that's actually the real deal, because the Bill of Rights is where they started coming back, because you've got guys coming to fisticuffs that are saying, no, we're not going to sign this. I'm not taking my power as an individual and as a state and giving it to this federal beast. We just left that. And that's how that came about, that conversation. And so they would not have ratified the Constitution without the agreement of the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights, for the first 10, that's what's called the Bill of Rights, those are about making sure that the individuals retain their rights, that the federal government only gets the power that it was given, because the power comes from the people.
That's amazing. I got a couple more questions. We can move on from here. Everybody says we're a democracy, but that's nowhere written in the Constitution.
We're a democratic republic.
Yeah.
And so we're a democracy. So, I don't know, gentlemen, how you guys have ran your house, but it's always great to have a democracy, but you aren't a democracy at your house, right? Type scenario.
My household is run as a benevolent dictatorship.
But it's not by you, right? My wife's a retired lieutenant colonel. I know who the benevolent dictator is, and I'm allowed authority because she gives me authority.
My right? Wife is Machiavelli's prince.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So so we look at this, and again, back to the founders, they were really, where is democracy most alive? It's at the library system. Who's running for the library? Who's running for city council? Your population comes out and votes, and their one vote counts for that one person. You start from there on, those become representatives. And then at the state level, it's a representative. And then at the federal level, it's a representative. So those representatives what's built the republic. And that republic, that representative type government, is also then where you start having checks and balances. So we have the three primary branches of government, but federalism is not just the three primary branches of government. It's also the states as individual sovereigns. And at the very, very base of all of that is the individual. And the reason we're a republic instead of just a raw democracy is, again, Madison and the founders were really brilliant. They knew that a democracy leads us to the masses ruling and the minorities getting crushed. And so then there's always a battle for the minorities to start these little tiny fiefdoms to fight against the masses. And they're like, that doesn't work either. So this is the longest lasting republic that has existed on the planet to our knowledge, right? 240 years, not 250 years, right? We're not even 240 years old yet on the Constitution. But, it starts with that First Amendment, which was the right to speak against the government. That's what the First Amendment is about. Because when the government does bad, you can stand up And it's actually been what's been of late of the last 2 decades of where they've wanted to crush that down, right? Freedom of press, freedom of conversations, freedom like this, to be able to have these conversations and not have the government telling us what we can and cannot say.
Yeah, it's a debate for people.
Matt, I think it's
I mean, the other debate that they talk about is what is it? The United States are instead of the United States is. That typo in there.
That's because we're a union, right? Where we were a confederacy before. So is everybody having to come together? And Hamilton, did you guys see that play? You had to have seen the play, right?
Yeah.
I haven't seen it. No.
Yeah.
You never saw it, okay?
No, I haven't seen
it. They miss a lot. they do miss parts of it, of how that whole conversation comes together. I don't think Madison's. He's a super short guy, never got married, not overly charismatic scenario. So there's not going to be a play about Madison. But in many ways, he was brilliant. Now they're like, oh, but he was a slave owner. Okay, well, I can't say you need to discount that. Right? Mm-hmm. Because in reality, whether that's right or that's wrong, you get into the debates. You say, of course, in today's world, we say that that's wrong. But in previous history, and by the way, we have more slaves today in the world. I'm not saying this right. I'm just saying there's more slaves today in the world as a population than there's ever been in the history.
No, but I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's a problem with revisionary history. You can't look at the past with today's spectacles, because things were different in an agrarian society. No one is saying it's correct. It's just, it's the evolution of society. We tend to improve. At least we hope.
We hope. But what I'm also saying is we tend to rename things and call it a little different. So you want in kind of an enslavement. I talk about this because part of my doctorate is in housing. So in that housing, we have this thing called AMI. Area median income, and then they manage that we're going to subsidize people that are in this level. Okay, so you've got an area median income. You say, hey, we're going to help people that make $60,000. We're going to help them get into a house. Well, the problem with that is that it keeps people making more, keeps them from striving to make more. And so when you have subsidized housing, because you've got a single mother and 2 kids, and you're like, but she can't take that education course at night, because if she raises her standard of living, all of a sudden she has to start paying for daycare 100%, and she has to start moving out of the house. So we really didn't help her. What we actually did was we created a sustained poverty level, right? So we just call it something different, but that's an indentured servant.
I never thought of it that way. That makes a lot of sense, though. I like it.
It's a trap.
So
yeah, that's right, Lou. When I sit here and I can see your wheels turning,
no,
you're
it's
like,
a trap.
this is nothing that our show's about.
No, but I love it. We've never had a common law professor, and we have to take the opportunity. So let's talk a little bit, only because we have to take the opportunity of a common law professor here. Let's talk a little bit about the administrative state, this new 4th branch of government that came into being a couple of decades ago. The executive was supposed to execute the laws. Congress was supposed to make the laws. But now we've got this administrative state that has run amok. How do we fix that?
Amok is a good line.
Yeah, how do we fix that?
A good line for it. So Congress is incredibly dysfunctional, and what people don't understand is it's supposed to be dysfunctional. We're supposed to move slow at making laws. When my youngest daughter was in high school, and she's in U.S. government, she has to come up with a new law. And she said, what do you think, Dad? I said, the new law should be you can't make a new law unless you take 2 laws off the books. We have too many laws, right? And that's because of the administrative state in many ways. So Congress only passes a handful of laws a year. The administrative, the SEC, and any one of them, and take any one of the
Department of Education.
They pass Department of Education. They take stacks of regulations that are never voted on by the representatives of the people. ALJ, administrative law judges, are not appointed by anybody. They work for that administration. So talk about a kangaroo court. So, again, the kangaroo court is that the court judge is the king in many cases, or the emperor, or whatever type scenario. So as you come up, you broke their law. As they say, in Russia, there is no such thing as an innocent person. If the state charges you, you're guilty. You're going to get a court, but you're going to be found guilty. And in administrative law, that's exactly how it's done. And jarcossy at SCOTUS here 18 months ago was a big change. Chevron deference was also a big change. And there's one right now up in front of, up for a writ with the SEC called Powell v. SEC. Which is a cool First Amendment lawsuit that's being brought against the SEC.
And what's that case about?
That is about when you sign a settlement with the SEC, which if you've been in business long enough and generally do raise a lot of capital, at some point you're going to have a disagreement with the SEC and you guys both agree to go your own way. Except with the SEC, they're the only administrative group that does this. They tell you you can't ever speak about it.
Well, let's not talk about the SEC because there's a former investment banker here on the podcast. His name won't go mentioned, but let's use the immigration system, right? So someone gets brought on immigration proceedings, whether it's asylum, deportation, whatever it may be. But now you're before an administrative immigration judge, and the prosecutor and the judge, their checks are signed by the same agency.
Yep.
How do we overcome this issue that nobody wants to address as an issue?
Well, I think the first thing that needs to be recognized is the understanding of why people like efficiency. By the way, travel the world, people do like autocrats. They like a system where things move fastly when it's their decision that they want.
Hey, the trains haven't been on time in Italy since 1944.
Were they really on time before that? I really don't know if they were on time.
Well, Mussolini used to tell the watchmen,
I know,
they're on time.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. It's like, well, okay. So, and that's what autocrats do, right? They set that up. And for the most part, there's a whole group of people that just want people to lead. They just want somebody else to make those decisions, and they just want to live their nice, comfortable life. So what happens, Lou, is that I think in that piece, until it impacts them, they don't really care. They're like, yeah. They must have done something wrong. I mean, how many times do you hear that? They must have done something wrong. Right? Did you ever have your father or mother to kind of slap you upside the head because we're of that age that it could happen? It's like boom, and it's like that was my brother, and they're like, yeah, but you were still doing something, right? I mean, so I think that's what happens. So understanding how and why, and what we hear is they tear apart the Constitution because they will say things. They, meaning in general, people will say, but they weren't good people. They had slaves, or they did this, or they were drinking, or they were doing this, or they were philandering. Whatever it was, that's what they use instead of saying, okay, no, the context of what they thought was actually brilliant. Oh, but it didn't allow for women. You're right, but it did allow for the progression to where women did have vote, where women did have total freedom, where people had a recognition. And so you need to go back and look at that. So then when we go back, we say, hang on. Let's bring a lawsuit against exactly that. 98% of most administrative actions never see a court. They settle outside of a court. They had settled within that administrative state. And so if they never see a court, it can never be tested as law. It doesn't just get dragged up to court. It actually has to be brought in a lawsuit. So that's where groups like NCLA and ICANN, two nonprofits that I'm a part of, are about that, about how do we stop that within this administrative state.
So let me ask you this. Constitutional law, then you decide you want to go into business. Did you think, operating agreements were just going to be easy compared to what reviewing the Constitution?
It's actually, what's great is it's actually the opposite. I was in business for many decades, and then I went to law school. So I had lawyers. We had a large law department. It's reporting up to me as the CEO of the company, and I was pretty good at it. And I was always interested in constitutional law. In part of my master's work, when I was going through school, I studied entitlements around the world. So I studied entitlements. That's basically who controls something and how can you get something done with it. So in China, it's not all that different than in Main Street, USA. You've got a government body that's going to say yes. They've got a methodology that you go through. And then if you don't do it properly, then they take it back. not really all that different in reality. Theirs is just about don't cause a riot, don't piss off the people, build something kind of cool and make sure that it's effective over time. That's what they got to, right? And same if you look at a downtown Hudson Yard project in New York City, that was kind of that same thing. So in doing that, I became more and more interested in it, and in a disagreement with a administrative government agency, I said, I'm going to get a little more educated in this. I've got time, I've got money. And that's how I started going down that passionate road.
Nice. So we like to give practical, actionable advice to the audience and listening. So let me give you a scenario. We have a business owner. He's doing roughly, maybe $300,000 to $500,000 in EBITDA. He's been working on this business for the last 20 years. He wants to retire. There is no buyer around. Nobody in the family wants to take it over. He doesn't have an employee that he thinks he can leave it to. What are his first 3 moves?
It's a great question. So we do have a number of frameworks go through that. The first thing that we need to look at is what risk does he have that that's unknown, and a lot of them are personal guarantees or other things that they get out, right? So where can we peel off the risk of that actual entrepreneur? And I use a metaphor. If you ever watched Harry Potter, so most people play chess and they move the chess aboard, and other people say, I'm playing 3-level chess. Well, you're still moving the pieces. And in Harry Potter, they played wizard chess. They're actually on the board, and if they lose, they die. And what most of the systems are around is getting that founder to always stay on the board. The bank, they go in the bank, they want to borrow $100,000. They're like, yes, of course, you and your wife need to sign this personal guarantee. Founder doesn't think anything of it because they're all in, right? That is the first piece that we kind of look and strip away what those risks are in there, because you got to separate out the founder. The second one is we check out that EBITDA. In almost all cases, not all, but in almost all cases, their actual income is much closer to maybe 800, maybe even $1 million, because they're running a lot of, they do their trips, they take their family out to dinners, and they do talk to business because they're doing they're not breaking any laws, but the actual income of that business is much higher in many cases. In some cases, it's much lower, right? But it's like, okay, where do we strip that out and get an actual number in there? And then there are actually merger and acquisition type bankers out there today that specialize in people who want to buy that type of business, not just private equity, somebody who wants to come in and they'll move to small town Iowa and they want to have that. They want to be free enterprise and they can get backed into that scenario. So the next step is first find out what it's really going to take you to exit the company. And we have one that, as an example, it's a little higher than that scenario, but the gentleman came to us and he was a good friend, and we went through it. And he was so excited. He had about a $15 million valuation on the company. And in his mind, he's living off $400,000 a year. He's like, this is going to be fabulous. I'm 68 years old. I'm going to be able to exit. The challenge was when we looked at it, we said, no, you're really taking off about $2 million a year by the time everything's done. And $15 million after you pay your taxes, the way you're structured, you're not going to have more than 5 years worth of basically living, right? So in under 18 months, in his case, we were able to get it to $45 million in exit value. We also were able to put tax strategies in place that he was able to retain most of that. He still owns the building as well. And he's got a credit tenant in there, so it's got an income stream. So it's a process of going through, and it's a bunch of advisors. It is not one attorney. It's not one accountant. It's not one thing. It sounds expensive. It's not cheap, but it is that value. So the first thing, look at the real income and then look at the real risks. And then also look at what are you doing in the rest of your life. I'm up in Oregon today. I live in Lake Tahoe. We're going for a 20-mile hike tomorrow morning that my wife loves to pull me on these type of things. Do they have life outside the business?
That is one of the biggest misconceptions and regrets that people have is, I'm going to do all this stuff, but what are you exactly going to do when you're done? Because after 12 months, most people regret selling their business. And if they're just home with their wife, they start fixing stuff around the house because they can't sit still and they want to get in trouble watching a YouTube video and saying, I can fix this. And your wife starts yelling at them and wants to throw them out of the house again.
Yeah, the wife wants you to go back to work or do something else. Or the spouse goes to work, right? Because they're like, I didn't marry for this.
Thomas, Matt and I met.
We see that a lot.
Matt and I met in the canyons of Wall Street, and we do still have some friends in high places. And before we started recording today, our old friend Donnie called us up and said he's going on vacation, wants to take a couple of days off. There's this really nice resort down in Florida. He's going to take a couple of days off. He's giving us 3 Sharpie markers, and he says, I want the 3 of you to draft anything you want. Go down to DC and draft 3 executive orders. Anything you want. The 3 of us have to come up with 3 executive orders. What could they be?
I'm going to need a minute.
Well, the interesting part is I love the executive orders, except they're going to get overturned by the
That
next
doesn't matter. That
we
doesn't
swing a
matter.
little left or right.
They always get overturned.
So yeah, they always do.
But what do we want to fix in government?
Back to Matthew's point, I think that the stringency of the administrative state, which has mostly happened through SCOTUS, but it has to happen at the state and the federal level, is there are no more administrative law judges, period. That they have to make decisions. So that separates out that internal scenario.
Okay. Executive order number 1, no más administrative law judges.
Across the U.S. It's at a federal and state level.
Okay. We just lost about 10,000 votes. No big deal. Next.
Okay. True.
Let's do something for education. How can we transfer the burden of education back to the states? Like the way kids should be raised and tutored in Illinois is probably different than the way they should be in Montana.
I think that's the whole basis of the Constitution and federalism, is that best decisions, especially the ones that most impact us, should be made at local levels, right? So most of this came about, or at least started, with Andrew Jackson. The government can't actually do most things. I don't know if you've gone to the airport recently, but you have to show your real ID. The real ID, right? The federal government could not have done that. Each state had to agree that they would do a real ID. And when they got all the states to agree to it, and the way they did that was through bribery. The federal government, during Andrew Jackson's time, first time we had a balanced budget, they're like, hey, we can actually build roads. All these highways are called the Lincoln Highways. It actually started during Andrew Jackson. You started bribing states to do, because the federal government couldn't do federal highways, that the states had to approve it. So now all of a sudden, that's how the Department of Education came about. So the people that say this, they're not wrong in that having all of this, no child left behind type scenario sounds great, except what you did was you slowed the whole fleet down so no child was left behind, as opposed to saying, okay, how do we make these determinations at that? So is it that the money, I go back to the AMI, does the money come with less rules? Maybe. I don't know. It is a more effective scenario to have a federal currency. But what you certainly shouldn't be doing is making the decisions at a federal level.
Executive order number 2. All right, pressure's on, guys. Number 3. This one better be good.
I lost 100,000 votes on that one, so just right there.
I'm going to pick us up some votes here, guys. I got it. I'm going to pick us up. I'd make all federal banks allow cannabis companies to deposit their money.
Oh, absolutely. We're close. We're close on that. I still do. I've been a lender to cannabis companies as part of our businesses. So we've done a number, and it was a seed sale growth type business.
In interest or in trade?
Yes. All the same. Remember, we go back to that full thing about what's currency. Could it be a building? Could it be a lawnmower? Could it be
exactly? That's what I was thinking. But you have to report if they pay you in trade. Do you report that?
It's consideration. It's consideration. Yeah,
it's consideration. Of course. No, I think that's good. I think that actually, from that standpoint, and Matthew, I think you bring up a really, really important part. So, this last week, somebody traded on a Trump text before the text came out on oil and gas.
$560 million trade? $560 million trade.
The calculation. Now, we know that they could figure out who that was immediately, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's probably Hegseth. I don't know who it was. It was somebody that said, hey, I'm running off there. It doesn't matter. It's their assistant or whoever it was made that trade. That was illegal based off of our laws. right? For somebody to say we can't find them is bullshit, because that just doesn't exist. Because nowadays you have the BOI, where beneficial ownership interest, right, in your businesses, and they say that's for terrorism. And then if you go put more than $10,000 in cash into the bank, they're going to track you for that because it's terrorism or it's because of drug trades or whatever. So that's where the banking really got utilized by Big Brother to be able to say, we're going to track everything. So if you want to not, it's why cryptocurrency is partly so favorable, is because people are looking at it. It's like, I don't want the government in here. I'm a libertarian, right? So I want the least amount of laws possible to be able to run a safe country.
Yeah, I don't think Bitcoin is what it used to be anymore. But that's a different conversation for a different time. But to your point, what's interesting about insider trading, right? Let's keep the topic there for a second. We have the stock market. We could trade on the stock market, but now we have these prediction markets, right? There's people making money left and right, knowing exactly what the president's going to do or somebody's going to do, but there's no laws against it. It's the wild, wild west. This is like the pre-1933, right? When everybody was insider trading. That's where everybody made money.
South Park did a great job on that one. I don't know if you saw it, but it was like so-and-so's mother's going to go whack. No, you got to watch certain ones of South Park, even if you don't like South Park. It's just, I love when you can use humor to talk about human, where we're moving towards. And sometimes they really get it. And on that prediction market, they're like, so-and-so's mother's going to go start a war in Iran. And this was a couple years ago that they're doing it. And it's like, what's going on? Then they're betting against it. Then the odds are raising, and it's like raising and raising and raising. And all of a sudden she goes off and she starts basically a fisticuff, type scenario. It's like, I won, and that's what it is. So prediction markets are basically still just hey, I can run faster than you. I'll bet you $10. Yeah. Okay. Here you go.
Yeah, pretty much,
but except now with technology, we can do it at a massive, massive scale very quickly.
I was sitting down with somebody the other day, and life is a funny thing. It's an older gentleman, right? And he goes to me, Matty, everything my friends went to jail for, is not legal. Gambling, marijuana, steroids, they call them peptides. It's all legal now.
It's all legal. Yeah, and it probably should. I'm from Nevada, so my grandfather moved to Nevada in the late 1800s. So we've been a libertarian state where we had gambling and we had prostitution and we made, cannabis and all these different things. Yet at the same time, it's a very protective state. So it's crazy, but it is interesting. The other part of it is, so you look at it, Nevada only is in session as our legislative session every other year for 120 days. So it plays to the rule of, instead of these full-time legislators that all they're ever doing is making laws. We need a new law. We need a new law. Need a new law. It's like, we've got enough laws. We don't need to make a new murder law. We already have a murder law. We don't have to define 15 different ways that murder is murder. It's pretty simply defined, right? Mm-hmm. So you look at that type of stuff. So I guess I'd put a hypo number 3 executive order in there is, no new laws till we take something off the books.
I love it. Listen, we want to be respectful of your time. We really appreciate you being here. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find the Founders Office?
Foundersoffice.com, and we'll get you the link too. But we have a lunch and learn. You can find me on LinkedIn, Thomas J. Powell, and or the Founders Office. And we have a Wednesday lunch and learn that is live, so people get to come in and ask questions, and we go through. We have. Part of my background is really being known for helping founders raise money, especially that early stage first round of capital. And so we have a methodology that we go through, that framework of how do they raise capital and how does it best benefit them. And so that is, and how do they not lose their company through that? So we talk through these processes. We have interesting guests. Love to have you guys come on at some point and talk through that. We can have constitutional law conversations again. And then my daughter and our general counsel, also as an offshoot of the Founders Office, have Women Talk Finance, WTF. So that's also another blog that's out there. So you can see those out there as well. So foundersoffice.com. Lunch and Learn, and WTF. Great way to track us.
Doctor, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. I had a great conversation.
Absolute pleasure.
I'm not going to ask you a last question because I want to have you back again.
That'd be great. I appreciate it. Thanks,
Awesome.
guys. This has been fun.
Awesome. Everybody, that's a wrap for the Liquid Lunch Project. We'll catch you on the next episode.